I used to think being strong meant always standing my ground, defending myself, speaking up the moment something felt wrong. That strength was about reacting, proving I wasn't to be messed with, showing the world that I could push back. But over time, I realized something quietly terrifying. The more I reacted, the more I gave myself away. I started noticing it in small moments. A sarcastic comment from someone at work would stay with me for hours. A passive-aggressive message from a friend would replay in my mind like a scratched record. My peace was constantly hijacked by things I had no control over. A sideways glance, a delay in a text reply, a vague comment that probably wasn't even about me. It was like I had holes in me, and life just kept pouring into them without asking. And then it hit me one evening while I was out walking, headphones in, just trying to breathe after a long day. I stopped mid-step and thought, why does everything have access to me? Why does every small thing have a key to my emotional state? That's when I started looking inward, and to be honest, it was uncomfortable. Carl Jung wrote that the things which upset us in others are often reflections of parts of ourselves that we haven't made peace with. That idea haunted me. What if every time I felt triggered, it wasn't really about them, but about me? That idea made me pay closer attention. I realized I was constantly reacting because I hadn't yet learned how to just be. How to sit with discomfort. How to hold stillness without needing to fill it. I was always trying to defend something, but I didn't even know what that something was. My ego, my fear of being misunderstood, my deep craving to be seen and validated. And it started so early. We're raised in a world that teaches us to respond, to perform, to prove ourselves. We're taught that silence is weakness and that not having an opinion means you're invisible. But no one tells us that strength can also mean not flinching, that it can mean letting the storm pass without chasing the thunder. So I tried something different. I decided, just for 1 week, to stop reacting. Not in a suppressive, fake kind of way. Not pretending things didn't bother me when they did, but in a conscious, deliberate way. I would feel everything, but I wouldn't respond to everything. I gave myself a rule. Whenever I felt that impulse rise, that familiar clench in my chest, that urgency to defend or explain, I would pause. Just a few seconds. Breathe. Observe. The first day, it felt like holding in a scream. My body was so used to jumping in, fixing, clarifying, defending. But as the days passed, I noticed something profound. The world didn't collapse when I didn't react. The people around me didn't get stronger or smarter just because I stayed silent. If anything, they got confused. Some even got nervous. It was like I'd removed a mirror they were used to seeing themselves in. And more importantly, I started feeling calmer. I wasn't constantly dragged into drama that had nothing to do with me. I wasn't leaking my energy trying to convince people of who I was. I wasn't checking my phone with that tightness in my stomach. I was just being. And that feeling, that stillness, became addictive. It's strange, isn't it? How much power we have that we just give away because we're afraid to hold it. How often we think reacting is power, when in truth restraint is where real strength lives, like the calm eye of a hurricane. The more I sat with myself in silence, the more I understood this. We're all walking around with open wounds, and most of the time our reactions aren't about now. They're echoes of then. Echoes of being ignored, dismissed, humiliated. Echoes of childhood moments where our voices didn't matter, and every time we explode or shut down, we're just trying to reclaim something we never truly received. But what if we didn't have to fight for it anymore? What if being unreachable, not in an arrogant way, but in a grounded, sacred way, was the real path to peace? What if we could finally stop trying to win battles that were never worth our time? That's where it began for me, not with some grand breakthrough or dramatic decision, but with a single question whispered into the silence of my own mind. What if I don't react this time? And from that question, everything changed. You know what no one tells you? That most of the pain we carry isn't from what actually happens. It's from the meaning we attach to it. The fight with a partner, the silent treatment from a friend, being left out, overlooked, misunderstood. It's not the event itself, but what we whisper to ourselves afterward that leaves the deepest scars. And those whispers, they come from somewhere deep, from within. I used to think I was just sensitive, someone who felt things more than others. But over time, I realized it wasn't sensitivity. It was unresolved conflict. Tiny wounds left unhealed, layered over with years of pretending everything was fine. Jung said it best, what we don't bring into consciousness comes back as fate. And that hit me like a punch to the chest. The day I reacted to something so small, so insignificant, that even I didn't believe my own anger. It was never about the other person. It was always me. That was the beginning of a long, uncomfortable realization. I had given other people way too much power over how I felt. A delayed reply could ruin my day. A misunderstood word could spin me into self-doubt. I had outsourced my sense of worth to the most unstable source, the reactions of others. And the craziest part? I thought that was normal. We're raised to crave acceptance, approval. We measure our worth by how others respond to us. A compliment feels like a win, silence feels like a loss. But that way of living, it's exhausting, and worse, it's fragile. One wrong look, one forgotten invitation, one harsh word, and your peace is shattered. I had to ask myself how much of my life is being lived in reaction to people who don't even truly know me. That question was a door to a part of myself I'd been afraid to face, the part that didn't know how to stand still without validation, the part that thought being liked was more important than being whole. And standing in front of that door, I felt exposed, raw, because it meant letting go of the comfort I found in being needed, in being praised, in being understood. It meant looking at myself without filters, seeing my desperation for connection for what it really was, a desperate attempt to patch over my own disconnection from myself. When you stop blaming others for how you feel, you don't just become stronger, you become free. It doesn't mean you stop feeling, God, no. It means you stop outsourcing responsibility for your feelings. You stop waiting for someone to fix you by behaving the way you want them to. You take your peace back, your joy, your stillness. And when you do that, when you really start to sit in that truth, something shifts. Suddenly, people's opinions start to matter less. Not because you've become indifferent, but because you've remembered something deeper. Your worth was never supposed to be up for negotiation in the first place. It was never about becoming cold. It was about becoming clear. Clarity like, I don't have to explain myself to be understood. Clarity like, their reaction is not a reflection of my value. Clarity like, I can choose to protect my peace, even when everything in me wants to scream. I think we all have that moment, eventually, where we realize that fighting to be seen by the wrong people is the quickest way to lose sight of ourselves. And once you taste what it feels like to not react, to just observe, to breathe, to smile, and stay centered, you never really want to go back. Not because you're above it, but because you finally understand the cost of giving away your center. That cost? It's too high. You end up exhausted, bitter, drained. You end up editing yourself until there's nothing real left. You end up being everything for everyone except for the one person who really matters. You. So now, when someone tries to provoke me, I don't rush to defend myself. I observe. I listen. I check in with myself before responding. I ask, is this mine to carry, or is it their storm trying to become mine? That single pause, that breath, it saved me more times than I can count. And the wild thing is, the more I center myself, the less chaos finds me. Or maybe it still finds me, but it no longer pulls me in like it used to. I've become the still point in the storm, not because I've stopped feeling, but because I've started owning what's truly mine and letting go of the rest. It's strange. You spend so much of your life trying to be understood, and then one day you realize you don't need to be understood. You just need to understand yourself. And in that moment, you become something most people don't expect. Untouchable in the softest, most grounded way. There's something no one really prepares you for. The loneliness that comes when you begin to let go. Not the kind that comes from being alone, but the deeper, quieter kind that arises when you start shedding everything familiar. Old patterns, old roles, old relationships that once felt like home. It creeps in slowly, like fog, and suddenly you're standing in a world that doesn't quite feel like yours anymore. I remember feeling it for the first time when I stopped trying to please everyone. It sounds empowering, right? Like this triumphant moment where you finally reclaim your life. But in reality, it felt like grief. Like I was mourning a version of myself that had spent years trying to be what everyone else needed. Agreeable, reliable, predictable. When I stopped saying yes out of guilt, people noticed. Some pulled away. Some got angry. Others tried to guilt trip me, make me feel selfish. And for a moment, I almost believed them. I questioned myself constantly. Am I being cold? Am I becoming one of those people who just doesn't care? But deep down, I knew the truth. I wasn't becoming colder. I was becoming clearer. I wasn't detaching from people. I was detaching from the illusion that I had to earn my worth through sacrifice. And that's when I started practicing something so simple, yet so powerful. The pause. Just one breath, one beat, a moment to ask myself, is this mine to carry? Before I agreed to take it on. That pause changed everything, because here's what I began to see. So much of what I thought was love was really just obligation wrapped in fear. Fear of being abandoned. Fear of not being liked. Fear of being seen as difficult. I had been using busyness, over-explaining, and self-erasure as a shield, hoping if I just gave enough, people wouldn't leave. But they left anyway. Or worse, they stayed and took more. Letting go of those patterns was terrifying, but it was also liberating. I started noticing the space it created. Space to breathe, to think, to feel what I actually wanted. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting to life. I was choosing. And with choice came discomfort. Because suddenly I couldn't blame others for my exhaustion or my resentment. I had to own it, all of it. My silence, my compliance, my refusal to set boundaries. That part stung, but it also woke me up. You know, Carl Jung once said that what you resist not only persists, but grows in size. I'd been resisting confrontation, discomfort, disapproval, and it had only grown louder in my life. The more I avoided it, the more power it gained. But when I faced it, really faced it, it began to lose its grip. I stopped explaining myself to people who never listened. I stopped over-apologizing for things that weren't mine. I stopped making myself small to keep others comfortable. And sure, I lost some connections, but I gained myself. I think we all reach that turning point eventually, where the pain of pretending finally outweighs the fear of being seen as we are. And on the other side of that fear is something breathtaking. Peace. Not the kind that comes from everything going right, but the kind that comes from no longer betraying yourself, just to be accepted. It's quiet, it's steady, it's honest. And yeah, sometimes it's lonely. But I'll take the loneliness of authenticity over the crowd of pretense any day. Because here's the thing no one tells you. When you let go of what isn't yours, you make space for what is. The friendships rooted in mutual respect. The moments that fill you instead of drain you. The choices that align with your actual self, not the version of you that played a role to survive. It takes time, and some days you'll want to run back to the comfort of who you used to be. But if you keep choosing that pause, that breath, you'll notice something incredible. You're not losing yourself. You're finally meeting the self that was buried underneath it all. You know what's strange? Letting go feels so unnatural even when you know it's the right thing. We cling to what hurts us, not because we enjoy the pain, but because it's familiar, because at least we know it. There's comfort in the predictable, even if it's killing something inside us. I remember holding on to something once, a relationship, a version of myself, a hope, long after it stopped serving me. I kept telling myself there was still value there, still something to be salvaged, but deep down I was terrified of what would be left if I finally let go. The silence, the unknown, the empty space that follows every release. It took me a long time to realize I wasn't afraid of losing them. I was afraid of meeting myself without them. That's the core of it, isn't it? We wrap our identities around people, roles, goals, stories, and when those start to fall away, we panic. Who am I if I'm not needed, if I'm not admired, if I'm not in control? We mistake holding on for strength, when sometimes the strongest thing we can do is open our hands and say, I'm ready to move on. And God, it's hard. Letting go feels like dying a little, like tearing away a part of your skin. But what if that pain isn't a sign you're breaking down? What if it's a sign you're finally shedding the version of you that was never meant to last? There's a kind of rebirth that happens when you release what you've outgrown, not all at once. Sometimes it comes in whispers. You start noticing that the things which once excited you now leave you feeling empty. The people who once made you feel alive now make you feel tired. The conversations feel forced, the spaces feel tight, and suddenly the life you built no longer fits. That's the moment you know something inside you has changed, and it's terrifying, because now you're in between, too aware to stay where you were, too unsure to leap into what's next. But that's where all growth begins, in the in-between. I think Jung understood this better than most. He wrote about how transformation often begins in what looks like chaos, a collapse of what once held meaning. He knew that to truly change, we must first face the void, that silence, that space, that pause between what was and what will be. And in that space, something miraculous happens. You begin to see clearly. You see how much of your energy was spent trying to maintain what no longer nourished you. You see how your clinging was rooted in fear, not love. You see that letting go isn't about forgetting or erasing. It's about honoring what was and giving yourself permission to seek what can be. And slowly, you stop needing closure from the outside. You stop waiting for the apology that will never come. You stop hoping they'll change, or that the situation will make sense one day. You accept that sometimes peace doesn't come from understanding, it comes from release. And that kind of peace, it's quiet, it doesn't scream, it doesn't announce itself, it shows up in small moments. You wake up and realize you haven't thought about them in days. You walk away from a triggering conversation without feeling the need to defend yourself. You sit in stillness, and for the first time, it doesn't feel like punishment, it feels like home. Letting go doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you care enough about yourself to stop carrying what was never yours to hold. It's not abandonment, it's alignment, not avoidance, but acceptance. And if you let it, this process will take you to places you couldn't reach while you were gripping so tightly to what was. It's scary, it's uncertain, It might even feel lonely, but it's also the doorway to freedom, because on the other side of letting go isn't loss. It's space. Space for healing, space for truth, space for you. There's a strange kind of power in silence, isn't there? Not the cold, punishing kind of silence used to hurt or manipulate, but the kind that comes from being centered, grounded, unshakable. I never understood it until I stopped trying to be understood by everyone. Most of us were taught that speaking up, defending ourselves, justifying our choices, that was strength. That being transparent, available, open at all times was the path to connection. But it took me years to realize that constantly explaining myself wasn't connection. It was a performance, a desperate need to be accepted, and it was draining me. You see, when you're always trying to make people get you, you hand over your peace. You invite them to judge your worth, question your motives, weigh your identity, and every time they do, you're left wondering if maybe you are too much, or not enough, or somehow wrong. But what if you didn't need to explain? What if your silence didn't mean weakness, but confidence? What if you could trust your own presence to speak louder than your words? That shift didn't come easy for me. I used to be the one who always followed up, always clarified, always filled in the silence because I couldn't bear what people might assume. I thought if I didn't speak, I'd lose control. But what I've found is the opposite. The less I explain, the more power I hold. It's in the stillness that people start to listen. Because when you're not scrambling to be understood, your energy changes. People can feel it. They sense that you're not trying to win them over. And that alone makes them curious. It's like an invisible magnet. The quieter you become, the more they lean in. It took practice. I started with little things. Not replying right away to messages, not over-explaining my boundaries, not justifying my preferences. At first, I felt rude, guilty even. But as time went on, I realized something profound. People who respect you don't need explanations, and those who demand them are often the ones who were never really listening anyway. Carl Jung once said that loneliness doesn't come from being alone, but from not being able to express things that matter. I used to believe that. But now I think sometimes the most powerful form of expression is not saying anything at all. Because not everything requires a response. Not every criticism deserves a defense. Not every invitation is worth accepting. And when you start moving from that space, from discernment instead of reaction, you stop bleeding energy. You begin to understand that not every battle is yours to fight, that some things are best left unanswered, that your silence can hold more authority than 1,000 perfectly chosen words. And here's the unexpected beauty of it. The less you speak, the more intentional your words become. You don't waste them on proving. You don't waste them on pleasing. You speak only when it matters. And when you do, it carries weight. There's something magnetic about a person who isn't constantly trying to be seen. It's not aloofness, it's presence. A calm self-assurance that says, I know who I am, and I don't need to advertise it. That's where I find myself now. Not trying to be mysterious or hard to read, just content in my own stillness. And maybe that's the real magic. When you stop chasing validation, it starts coming to you. Not in the loud, attention-seeking ways we're used to, but in subtle shifts. A deeper kind of respect. A quiet acknowledgement. A sense that people are paying attention. Not because you begged for it, but because your energy speaks for itself. The silence I once feared has become my sanctuary. It's where I think clearly. It's where I reclaim my power. It's where I finally hear my own voice, unfiltered by the noise of everyone else's expectations. And in that space, I've found something I never expected: peace. Real, grounded, unshakable peace. The kind that doesn't ask for approval. The kind that doesn't chase. The kind that doesn't need to explain. There was a moment, not long ago, when I realized I was exhausted not from doing too much, but from being too available, too accessible, too willing to bend, explain, comfort, perform, and not just for others, but for a version of myself I thought I had to be in order to be worthy. It hit me during a conversation with someone who used to take so much from me, time, energy, space, without ever noticing. I sat there, listening, nodding, offering support, just like I always had, and then, mid-sentence, something inside me just stopped. I didn't want to fix it. I didn't want to rescue, soothe, or explain. I just wanted to be. That's when I understood the difference between connection and obligation. One fills you, the other empties you, and I had spent years mistaking the two. We're taught that love looks like self-sacrifice, that kindness means always saying yes, that to be a good person is to always be there, to never make others uncomfortable, to constantly prioritize their needs above our own. But the truth is, that kind of constant availability is a slow death. Of boundaries, of identity, of self-respect. It doesn't make you noble. It makes you depleted, and people don't value what is endlessly available. They consume it. So I began experimenting with something radical, putting myself first. Not in a loud, dramatic way, not in a way that declared war on anyone else, but quietly, gently, intentionally. I stopped saying yes when I meant no. I stopped responding immediately just because someone expected me to. I stopped sharing every thought, every feeling, every plan, especially with those who had done nothing to earn that kind of access. At first, it felt unnatural, like I was being rude, but that was just the old guilt speaking. The guilt that had been trained into me over years of people-pleasing and self-erasure. And slowly something began to shift. People noticed. Some respected it, some didn't. The ones who were used to my endless availability got uncomfortable. They asked if I was okay. They tried to pull me back into old dynamics, but I stayed still. I didn't justify. I didn't argue. I just held my ground. It was hard, but it was also the beginning of something extraordinary, because when you stop being available to everyone, you start becoming available to yourself. You have more energy, more clarity, more capacity to actually feel what you feel, want what you want, need what you need. You start hearing your own voice again, underneath the noise of everyone else's expectations. You realize that being unavailable isn't selfish, it's sacred, it's a filter, a boundary. A declaration that says, not everyone gets access to me just because they want it. Carl Jung talked about individuation, the process of becoming whole, of separating who you truly are from who the world told you to be. This was my individuation, learning that I didn't owe anyone constant access to my thoughts, my time, or my emotional labor, that my needs weren't a burden, that my time wasn't disposable, that my presence wasn't something to be handed out like a consolation prize. I started noticing how much more powerful I felt in my silence, in my absence, in my no. And not because I was trying to be distant or difficult, but because I was finally living from a place of fullness, not from a place of fear. And the irony, the less I tried to prove my worth, the more it radiated. The less I explained, the more I was heard. The less I gave away, the more I received, not just from others, but from myself. I used to think I needed to be everywhere for everyone in order to be loved. Now I know that being everywhere for myself is the only way I've ever truly felt whole. This isn't about being hard or cold or detached. It's about reclaiming your value. It's about no longer handing yourself out in pieces to people who haven't earned the privilege of your presence. It's about becoming the kind of person who doesn't need to be everywhere, because just being fully yourself is more than enough. There's something beautiful and a little terrifying about reaching the point where you no longer ask, do they like me? And instead ask, do I even like them? That shift, it changes everything. I didn't notice it happening at first. It crept in slowly, like most real change does. One day I just found myself sitting in a conversation that would have once consumed me, trying to impress, to charm, to prove myself. And instead of playing the part, I sat back and wondered, why am I even here? It wasn't arrogance, it was clarity. Because when you start prioritizing your peace, your values, your time, the world rearranges itself. People you once chased begin to feel distant, not because they've changed, but because you have. And that's what no one prepares you for, the quiet grief of outgrowing versions of yourself that once felt like home. For so long, I filtered my life through one question. Will they accept me if I show up like this? And now? Now I ask, does this space honor the person I've worked so hard to become? That might sound selfish. It used to sound selfish to me too, but it's not. It's maturity. It's self-respect. It's the understanding that not everyone is meant to walk every chapter with you, especially if the new chapter requires a deeper level of presence, honesty, and depth. Carl Jung spoke often about the shadow, the parts of ourselves we hide, reject, or disown. For a long time, my shadow was this quiet desperation to be liked, to be chosen, to be seen. I'd dress it up as kindness, loyalty, empathy, and sure, I have all those qualities, but when they're laced with fear, they become tools of self-abandonment. I gave so much of myself away trying to be what others needed. Now I ask if others can meet me where I am, and when they can't, I no longer shrink. I no longer twist myself into a more palatable shape. I no longer translate my silence into guilt or my needs into burdens. I simply take a step back, not in anger, say, but in alignment. And the world doesn't end when you do this. Actually, it begins. You start noticing new kinds of people showing up, people who don't need you to explain your worth, people who see your boundaries and respect them, people who aren't threatened by your silence or your depth or your standards. But before they arrive, there's a space, a stretch of time that feels both liberating and lonely, where you're not who you used to be, but not yet surrounded by what truly fits. It's a sacred in-between, a time to sit with yourself, to grieve the parts of you that clung to crumbs, to celebrate the part of you that finally said no more. It's during this time that you build the muscle of self-trust. You learn that your intuition isn't lying, that your discomfort around certain people isn't pettiness, it's wisdom, that the voice whispering "this doesn't feel right" is not to be silenced but followed. You stop needing closure from people who never offered clarity. You stop needing approval from people you wouldn't trade places with. You stop trying to explain your worth to those committed to misunderstanding it. And in this stillness, you meet someone you've been avoiding for years, yourself. Not the curated version, not the masked one, but the real you. Flawed, honest, wild, grounded, tired of pretending. And maybe for the first time, you don't flinch when you meet your own eyes. You don't cringe at your truth. You don't apologize for what you need. You stand there, quiet and whole, knowing that being fully yourself might cost you certain people, but it will never cost you your soul again. That is freedom, that is peace, that is home. It all comes down to this, doesn't it? After all the reflection, all the letting go, all the painful honesty, there comes a moment when you stop asking the world to see you and you finally see yourself. Not through the lens of who you were trained to be or who others needed you to be, but in your raw, undiluted truth. And in that moment, you stop chasing. You stop running after the people, the approval, the answers that were never meant for you. You stop shrinking to fit into rooms that were never built for your voice. Because now you're operating from something deeper. Not ego, not fear, not performance, but essence. And essence doesn't negotiate. It just is. I can't tell you the exact day it happened. There wasn't a fireworks moment, no loud awakening. It was subtle. Like one morning I woke up and felt anchored, not invincible, not detached, just rooted in myself, in my own enoughness. That's not to say the old wounds never whisper. They do. Sometimes they still catch me off guard. That flicker of self-doubt, that urge to explain, that familiar pull to fix or please. But now I see them, I greet them, and I choose differently, because the truth is, the way the world treats you is often a reflection of how you've been treating yourself. When I treated my time like it was disposable, others did too. When I made excuses for people who drained me, I trained them to keep taking. When I avoided hard boundaries, I invited soft disrespect. But now? Now I lead with a quiet clarity. I am not for everyone. And that's not only okay, it's necessary. Carl Jung spoke of individuation as the path to wholeness, becoming who you were always meant to be, beneath the conditioning, beneath the masks. And I finally get it. It's not a destination. It's a choice you make over and over again, every day, to choose your truth over approval, your peace over performance, your alignment over attachment. And yeah, the world shifts when you do that. Some people fall away, some stay confused, some resent the change. But the ones who remain, they're the ones who see you without needing you to be anything but you. And that kind of connection is worth every goodbye. But more than that, you begin to respect you, and that respect becomes your compass. It becomes the lens through which you move, speak, choose. You no longer ask, will this make them like me? You ask, does this honor the self I've worked so hard to meet? That's where real power lives, in not being reactive to the world's noise, but responsive to your own soul. It's in walking away from what doesn't resonate, even when it's familiar. It's in not over-explaining your silence, your absence, your standards. It's in knowing your energy is sacred and not everyone gets access. Not because you're trying to be elusive, but because you've learned the cost of being constantly available. You no longer need to prove, to perform, to be chosen, because you've already chosen yourself. And from that place, you don't just survive, you lead. Not loudly, not forcefully, but with a presence that shifts the atmosphere, that magnetizes respect, that speaks before you say a word. You become unreachable to what drains you, but deeply available to what aligns. And maybe that's the ultimate gift of all this work. Not a perfect life, but a life that finally feels like yours. Quietly, boldly, unapologetically.